Welcome back to So There I Was. I'm the host, Travis Womack, and today's guest is a longtime LinkedIn connection and semi coworker back in the day. His name is Luke Shabro. So, Luke, welcome to the show. He's a former Navy vet, turned to be an Army employee. That's pretty awesome. It's how we do things. We convert them all over, and has a man of mystery. He reads more than I possibly could ever read in my life, but I enjoy the book reports, and we'll get to that. And his current also is a host of his own podcast in his own right called The Mad Scientist for Trade Doc. So welcome, Luke.
Hey, thanks for having me, Travis. I'm sorry we had to reschedule things. I think I had COVID the last time. It was just a bit of a mess, but I've actually been chomping at the bit to get on. I was just listening to your episode with Adam Bratz. I've been connected with Adam for a while. I'm a big fan of his for a long time too, and a couple other episodes. So I've just been really excited. Yeah, I'm Luke Shabro. I was in the Navy as an enlisted intelligence specialist for 8 years. Got out as a E6, and I was on about 4 years on the USS John C. Stennis out of San Diego and then Bremerton, Washington. And then I was an instructor with the Navy Intel Schoolhouse over at Dam Neck in Virginia Beach, Virginia out there. Got out of the Navy and then finished up going to college over at Old Dominion University, and then got converted to the dark side, started contracting for the Army for about 3 years, and then became a government or Army civilian about 8 years ago. So I've been working really in the Army Training Doctrine Command, G2, or the intel function for those who don't know, for the last 8 years. So now in my role, I work as the director of wargaming for the G2. And then also, as you noted, with the podcast, we have the Convergence podcast, which I co-host with my co-host Matt Sanisberg as the deputy director of the Army Mad Scientist Initiative. So it's been a really fun ride. I do always have to put out my opinion and my views to not reflect those in the Department of Defense, Department of the Army, or any U.S. government entity. So that's it. But that was my kind of winding path to get to the Army.
Awesome. Yeah, we all have to have that legal disclaimer nowadays. It seems like it's all good. So you were in the Navy. You were one of the few I've ever talked to that have been on both West Coast and East Coast. That's pretty, from my understanding from the Army, is pretty rare.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to. I never intended to go to the West Coast. I joined. So I was a Navy brat, and at least till my dad retired when I was 9. But I had lived in Fort Michigan, then lived in Virginia, and then lived Goose Creek, South Carolina, and then back to Virginia. And so I had always been East Coast. Wanted to stay that way. I took orders, and or rather, when I was coming out of Intel school, you got a chance to kind of pick your orders, and they said, "Here's a slate. This is what you get." And I figured, okay, like East Coast, easy, like biggest naval base in the world right here,
Right.
and every single thing was West Coast on there or Japan, and it was like, okay, well, we're doing this, and I was like so stoked. I was like, okay, well, I'll go to San Diego, like beautiful San Diego, never been to California. This will be great. And I did, and it was great. And my dad, who was, retired Navy, called me. He goes, "Yeah, I just heard about the Stennis is moving out of San Diego." And I was like, "Oh man, maybe they're going to the USS John F. Kennedy was getting decommissioned." I said, "Maybe they're going to Florida or maybe Norfolk." And my dad said Bremerton, Washington. And I was like, "Where the
Oh,
hell is
no.
Bremerton, Washington?" And I was listening to the other episode where your grandfather had been a commander of Bangerton,
Yeah.
and I was not stoked. So it was an experience, but yeah, I ended up going to the West Coast, and it was a bit of a blessing in disguise. It really got me out of my comfort zone. I'd really grown up a lot in the Hampton Roads area, so to get to go to the other side of the country and also go to the Asia Pacific region when we deployed really changed a lot of things for me. So really getting to experience that. But then I was ready to come home, so to speak,
Oh, yeah.
and had the opportunity to go be an instructor, and I really loved what I did, and I loved being able to teach. So it was a great opportunity. So yeah, I got to experience both sides of it, and a lot of guys don't necessarily get to do that. And so yeah, good times.
That's awesome. I think it's one of the funniest things, or the differences of like, for like the services, like the Army doesn't really understand, or we don't really deal with it on a daily basis. So part of like the East Coast Navy Marines, the West Coast Navy Marines, and the the Japan Navy Marines. It's like three different like
It's a
lifestyles.
it's different cultures, like
Yeah,
completely. Like you can just see it when you get out there. It's just very different. And honestly, like I'm a little biased, but Norfolk gets a lot of hate. There's a
yeah,
lot of folks in the Navy who are like, I never want to go to Norfolk. But I think there's definitely benefits to both coasts. But it was interesting for me to kind of see those differences. But at the same time, it wasn't all that odd because I think like sometimes I think a lot of culture shock. It might actually be easier for some folks who come from smaller towns or more rural areas when they could join like the Army or
right,
even Air Force has a lot of the central U.S. kind of bases, a little more remote or
right.
just a different feel. And so for people coming to the Navy, sometimes it could be a bit of a shock to kind of deal with that. But I grew up in Navy town, so to me
Right.
it was not a strange thing to see Navy folks around. And I think you see Army is a little different in that aspect of kind of being, I don't want to say the only show in town, but really it's different for the people around them as well.
Yeah. I mean, I'll never forget when I was a lieutenant, I had a young girl. She was from Malibu, California, and joined the Army as a HIMARS mechanic. And, we were in Dubai, and she was like, yeah, this sucks. It's just so hot. She's like, I'm from Malibu. So she's like,
Man,
and we got stationed in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And she's like, there's no water for miles.
it's brown. It's
Yeah,
very, very
exactly.
brown.
So now I always,
Yeah, Dubai is insanely hot,
yeah,
and
the humidity
I've
is,
I've been there a bunch, and it was just you couldn't get away from it. Even at
yeah,
night, you're just
yeah.
sweating to death.
Like July and August, you're like, it's it's 2 a.m. Why is it 98 degrees and 90% humidity? This is ridiculous. So yeah,
Yeah,
I was,
I was on the carrier, and when we were in the Gulf, I felt bad for the guys who were on the flight deck. I mean, it would get so hot their boots would stick to the flight deck.
oh yeah, I can only imagine on that one, going through the straight out there. There's I always compare the different coasts though, is like, so I was airborne infantry for years.
Yeah.
And my first time to interact with like a non-airborne unit was in Iraq in '07, and we were with a striker unit. It was like, okay, this is the only thing I can compare it to. Is this just completely different methodologies, same war, same fight, same goal, but it's like, no, we'll just walk. And they're like, we don't walk ever. Like, we have strikers. Like, we get in the drive, and we're like, how does that work? Like, you can see us, like, our brains were like, this is, you can we can just sit down. This is, I love this.
Yeah, when I was a West Coast sailor, we had they used to call it Stennis hours. And when you're when you're out to sea, it doesn't matter. It's like it's 24/7. Whatever your watches are, whatever
Yeah.
your shifts are, that's what you do. But when we were in port, especially when we were in San Diego, it was hey, about 7 in the morning to 1300. As long as you get all your stuff done, you're out. You don't take lunch, but you just get out. That is unheard of a lot of times in the East Coast Navy.
Yeah.
It's just not. It's a lot more formal. It's not the way things are done nearly as much. So it's kind of lax West Coast
Yeah.
attitude as opposed to the East Coast, where you can almost feel you're closer to the higher stars and everything.
You're too close to the flagpole.
So, yeah, you're a little too close to the puzzle balance up at the center.
Yeah, it's funny because the Marines headquarters are in the West Coast, but when I was in the career course for to be a logistics officer, we had a couple of Marines, like 4 or 5 Marines in our course with us, and the girl was in my class. She was an East Coast Marine. It's like, yeah, we call ourselves the real Marines, because she said the ones that because like apparently it is that is the my brain just stopped on the North Carolina
down in Lejeune.
Yeah, Lejeune. Thank you. My brain. I want to say Pendleton. That's
yeah,
West Coast.
Yeah.
So Lejeune is like everything's just rigid, and then like the Hollywood Marines were the ones that are
29 Palms.
Yeah, and then there's like the Japanese station ones, and like they kind of forget they have them from time to time.
That's a whole other animal on Okinawa.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine that.
Wow.
So that's crazy. Hey, but I want to hit on one thing. This is so much fun. So one of my favorite things has been watching your LinkedIn stuff, and you average almost a book a week, if not every about 10 days. It's pretty amazing. So I know a lot of the listeners I have are always looking for a good book. I always try to refer some good books out there and stuff. But what are you reading right now? Let's start there.
So right now I'm generally reading about 2 to 3 books at a time. And the reason for that is I tell people like, like people say, oh, you read a book a week or everything else. Cause I usually try to aim between about 50 and 75 books a year.
Yeah.
But I always have different media methods for that. So I always have an audiobook on, which I have about a 2 hour commute every day, 1 hour each way. And so I'm usually listening to an audiobook on there. I do it when I'm doing anything around the house. It's just a habit, especially when I'm traveling and everything else. I'll keep a book on the Kindle app or my Kindle. And then I'll also have like a paper copy book. So right now I'm reading The Third World War by Sir John Hackett. So it was a book that was written in, I want to say 1968, but it was basically about, I don't know if have you ever read World War Z?
I have. That's a crazy question. The few books that I actually haven't read, you got me on one. So that's great.
So World War Z is one of my favorite books. It's really
Yeah.
amazing. I was lucky to get the chance to meet Max Brooks and really just an excellent book. So Third World War is kind of in that same vein. It was written in the 60s as a war that happened in 1985 about essentially the Third World War, and a lot of it is through interviews or after action reports, like if you were reading the AAR.
Okay.
And it was a big wake up call to a lot of Western military leaders about all the things that could go wrong in a potential war. And actually, it was part of partially inspiration to World War Z.
Wow.
And so it's a really interesting book. It can be a little dense sometimes to get through, but I think it's really interesting because I think a lot about like how do you think about the future without just kind of projecting from where we are right now.
Right.
And that's been a lot of my job and just kind of the way I think about things. So that one's really interesting. And then I was recently listening to actually a book. John Eisenberg is a reporter, or used to be, I think, for the Baltimore Sun, but he covered the Baltimore Ravens a lot. And he wrote a great book called The League that was all about the start of the NFL. And I'm a big football fan. You can see my Steelers stuff
I'm
on
sorry.
now. Hey, man, I'm struggling through it now, but this is black and gold forever. So,
Okay, I can't say much.
but he just came out with a book. It just came out like maybe a week or two ago that I was finishing up, called Rocket Men, and it was about basically the rise of black quarterbacks in the NFL and the struggles that they went through to get
That's awesome.
opportunities. It was really, really, really eye-opening book, really excellent. So those are the two primary ones I've been reading lately.
Awesome.
But like you said, I can't help myself. I go through a lot of books, and it's not. Some people, I think, sometimes maybe even think like it's a vanity metric, where it's like, oh, like I just want to show people how many books I read. It's just really, I've always kind of had this addiction to learning because I feel like the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. And that makes me just want to keep finding out more and more. A good friend of mine said, you don't want to, I said, she was talking to me and said, like, you're so focused on trying to find all stuff out. I was like, well, like I want to know a little bit about everything.
Yeah.
And she goes, no, you want to know everything about everything. I was like, no, that's fair.
That's fair.
And so I just get obsessed with learning this stuff. And I think that's what helps us, with people looking for books to read, like for what you've done and what you do. I can't recommend enough. David Epstein has a great book called Range.
I recommend that book to everybody.
Oh, it is one of the books I recommend most to everybody. I think it's How Generalists Triumph in a Specialist World. Yeah, you got a copy right up there.
Bam.
Perfect. It's just so amazing, and I think it applies so much to the veteran community. Because we're asked to do this, right? You were an airborne paratrooper, but there was a lot of other things you had to do as well. I was an intel specialist in the Navy. I also was a painter. Right. I was on tile team playing tile. I was having to do a lot of different jobs that weren't really my job. And
Right.
we find ourselves doing that all the time in the military. You just
Yeah.
have to do the task at hand is, and that actually creates that range that
Oh
you
yeah.
can use in your post-military career.
That book, like I listened to it on audio, and when I had a newborn, I was like laying there trying to survive bedtime, and like go to sleep. But and I like it was almost too much. Like your brain is like trying to grasp because he does such a great job of like just giving you like a bazillion examples of like the Tiger Woods examples, obviously the effect that's had of a 2-year-old hitting a putt on TV. But I thought the coolest thing in that one, not to just to promote somebody else's book, but is the orchestra thing. Like I thought the all female orchestra where they just traded instruments around and no one was like a specialist in one instrument. I was like, that's phenomenal. Like I just think that you know
It just
those things are
it
crazy.
changes. I think I think it really spoke to me because I feel like the way I've never felt like the absolute subject matter expert in anything,
Right.
or the top of the cream of the crop of
Right.
any particular subject or skill or anything like that. But that's always been my approach, is to try and have that range. And I think I can do my best when I can do kind of, I think you talked about it a little bit with even how Einstein, I'm not comparing myself
Yeah.
at all
Yeah.
to Einstein, but analogous learning, and this ability to see things connect in ways that don't make the linear kind of A to B sense necessarily, but you see things in life that you can then connect in other ways. And so
Yeah.
that book was just that just really really spoke to me.
Yeah. He sends out a thing, an email like once a month.
To check that one out.
Yeah. So it's a really cool email, just like a really condensed version of all that stuff that he's done. If you haven't read it, I'd be shocked if I actually read a book that you haven't read. I'll be amazed. But so the lead into this book is actually
The Sports Gene.
Sports Gene. And
I've
that
read it.
so I have to like I've had to listen to the whole book twice because like there's just so many data points. But the vision part of baseball, like whoever that doctor was, it was like talking about drafting or playing the Dodgers with back in the 80s and said, oh, who should I play? What rookie should I play? It's like that guy. And he based the entire decision off of medical and vision, because I guess Mike Piazza had like 28 vision. Like it's like beyond perfect naturally. And he's like, he can see the ball better than anybody else. And then Mike Piazza played that year and got rookie of the year and all this stuff. And then like he later in his career as a doctor, he went to the St. Louis and then did the same thing in St. Louis. Like, oh, you should play that guy. It's Albert Pujols. It's like because he's got better than perfect. And then you look at the Hall of Fame players or hitters of the current eras, and they all have uncorrected perfect vision, like 28, 29, just insanely good vision. I thought,
The interesting one was the outlier in that, which was actually Babe Ruth.
yeah,
And they believe Babe Ruth was almost blind in one eye, and the overcorrection that he did, they believe potentially was a big part of his anticipation of being able to hit. But yeah,
yeah,
that book.
that's a
So I
great book.
think for some, I can't even remember the podcast now. I heard Epstein on the podcast talking about the Sports Gene,
Yeah,
pick that up, and then that caused me to pick up Range, and
yeah.
just a fantastic author.
Well, he and Malcolm Gladwell are on a podcast together from time to time. Like
Yeah, I might have
Gladwell,
heard that episode. Yeah,
yeah, Gladwell has his own podcast.
or one of those.
I love Malcolm Gladwell's like Talking to Strangers is fantastic. And
I love. I should say I used to love Malcolm Gladwell,
yeah,
and I still like him. But I had some issues with the Bomber Mafia, but that's a whole other podcast.
yeah, that's a wrong podcast. but no, but it's awesome. I think what I love to highlight though is that I think there's a lot of soldiers and vets out there, which is what this podcast is designed for, that forget that our desire to learn should never stop. And I think the overarching veteran or current service member who's not currently reading stuff that your organization puts out you know, like I had Ash Hess on there, he wrote the marksmanship thing. Well, I went through y'all's office at some point,
Yep,
y'all's building.
absolutely.
And it's like, I look at the pistol that the Army is using, and I'm like, I haven't been in a combat unit for years, so I'm like, how many people are actually reading that? And I hope a lot, for the sake of better marksmanship and pistol shooting and cleaning and maintenance and all those things. And I was a maintenance platoon leader. There's a lot of reading when you
And,
read those
and
things.
there's at the risk of sounding too serious, but we're dealing with everything that's going on in the Middle
Yeah.
East right now, everything that's happened in Ukraine, and we have really the greatest pacing threat that we've had to deal with since the Soviet Union and China.
Yeah.
And in all reality, I think there's a lot of investment across the DoD in disruptive and emerging technologies, and that's all well and good. And I've been a part of both in my professional, but also on my own personal side with like Defense Entrepreneurs Forum and some other groups working the innovation pieces. And I think that's just critical. But in reality, there's likely not going to be a war winner. And what I mean by that is we're not going to be the first to get to the atomic bomb again. We're not going to be the first to dominate space. We're not going to be the first to, get ahead of everyone when it comes to precision guided munitions, the way we saw that cascading victory in the Gulf War. That's not going to happen. There's too much democratization of technology. Now we have to invest in those things, and we have to figure out where we can win and where we've kind of always won really is with our people. And that comes from learning. We have to have the best educated force out there. And I think obviously I can't speak in my official capacity, but even as a American citizen, I can say that TRADOC and the Army and the DoD as a whole puts out the best material when it comes to training and thought and critical thinking and military operations and all the enablers with that. But also, I would encourage all the soldiers, airmen, Marines, sailors, guardians, all those service members to read not only the manuals and everything else, or even military history or everything specialized in your field, but read widely, man. Just consume it all. And it doesn't, some people say like I'm not a book reader, and that's fine. There's a lot of people out there, but I think the opportunity through different multimedia that we've seen, not only in audiobooks, it can help some people. Like I said, I turn through a lot of audiobooks. People think I'm nuts because I have mine at like 1.5 speed. But it started because I had one narrator that was like so slow I just couldn't deal with it.
Yeah.
Cranked it up and then just got used to that. But there's what we're on right now. There's a bevy of podcasts out there. Even there's been some great work. Like there's a group called, it used to be Fleet Writers Room, started with the Navy, but now they've expanded across the DoD. It's called Force Writers Room. It's created graphic novels depicting future warfare. Really amazing stuff.
It's kind of like Ghost Fleet's that way. It's kind of the concept of Ghost.
Exactly.
Ghost
I've worked with P. Singer and Alex Cole for a few years now, and say a few. Really, it's been like 7 years. But they put out amazing stuff. There's just all these opportunities, and I think they're doing themselves a disservice if they don't try to engage with all those different types of media for learning. But again, keep it. I go back to the Epstein thing. Like, focus on the range. Don't worry about being specifically so great in your niche, area, but just open it up and see what happens.
Yeah. One of my dreams, if I can get that guy on this podcast, would be great. I've been trying for about a year to get Don Bentley. He's he kind of took over my brain just stopped. The Rainbow Six writer.
Oh yeah, took over the Tom Clancy.
Yeah, he's one of the co-writers for Tom Clancy. And Clancy obviously passed away, but so he's one of the keeping the legacy going. And he's a former pilot in the Army, and so he's just a good writer. And he's gotten, I think he's on his 3rd book in the Clancy line of keeping that storyline. It's pretty cool. I'm like, I gotta get you on here. That'd be so cool. So
yeah, absolutely, man. And I feel like I have to meet the spirit of the podcast though,
Oh yeah,
and give my so
I
there
want.
I was. I
That's
feel like
the
that's a rule, right?
it is. It's a rule. You have to start with that phrase too. That was my next question. So enough about books and just fun, but I got to hear the of the West Coast, East Coast, whichever one it was. What's the craziest Navy adventure you got?
I don't know if it was. This wasn't necessarily the craziest Navy adventure, but this one just made me. It still makes me laugh, and I love to tell people the story. And it wasn't really East Coast or West Coast, actually. It was Midwest. I was at Great Lakes, Illinois.
Of all the
Um,
places.
yeah, I heard one of your. I was at boot camp and I heard one of your previous guests talking about good old Navy boot camp up at Great Lakes. Were great mistakes. And being up there, I was there probably, maybe the worst time you could be there, except maybe summer, maybe it's Thai. I was there November to January, and got to spend Thanksgiving, Christmas up at Great Mistakes, and so I went up there. I was at MEPS in Richmond, Virginia. So I went to MEPS, did the whole second swearing in. November 2003. I always remember because I joined Veterans Day 2003, got out of the Navy, Veterans Day 2011. So
Wow.
we went there, was with a group of folks from Richmond who were going up. We got there. So next morning or next afternoon, whatever it was, fly out, get up to Chicago Airport, and they tell you to report up to the Navy office up there, just so you can hear the announcements. And we decide we're going to go get coffee at Starbucks before we go over and sign our lives away. We got our asses chewed a little bit for that one when we got there. I'm thinking no big deal. I've always been kind of a music junkie, and I had this CD player for the kids out there, these things we used to listen to music on. And so I had this CD player, and I thought I knew I couldn't have it obviously in boot camp, so I thought, okay, I'll just ditch it at the airport. I'll just leave it, and somebody can have it. I just want to be able to go into this thing for the next 9 weeks. And so I decided to take it. And then when we went to the office for the Navy, I thought we'd have a few minutes, but instead they dressed us down and had us all lined up. And I realized it was in my pocket. And I came in, we went on the bus to Great Lakes. We get off, they line everybody up in the hallway, or in the Navy, as we call it, the air passageway. We're all standing there, and all of a sudden I hear, "Who's the fruitcake with the CD player?" And I had to go, "Me, petty officer." And so he comes over, the little trucker, we call him RDTs, comes over and ended up being pretty nice about it. He's like, "All right, fruitcake, you're going to put it on the ground so when I tell everybody to drop their stuff, you don't break it." But I just always got a laugh out of
A great
my
start.
dad had told me before I went in, my dad had told me before I went in, he's like, "Don't worry about like trying to, star in boot camp and become like, leader of the division or whatever." He's like, "That stuff's a pain and it's not gonna be worth it. He cares
That's
once
the
you get out of
worst.
it." And so I was just, he's like, "If you're invisible, you're good to go." And like, man, I did not start off.
I didn't make it the first hour. That's so true.
So
Like,
that was my I was. But yeah, that was I had a lot of wild times in the Navy. It was a great time. My first deployment was really just a West Pacific cruise. So we ended up going to Australia, Sasebo, Japan, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia,
that's
and
awesome.
that was about it. But it was a great experience. And then I spent most of the next deployment because we were doing strike missions for Iraq and Afghanistan, so we spent most of it in the Gulf. But
Yeah.
that one kind of got to go to Singapore and Hong Kong and a lot of other spots. So it was a great experience and it was wild times out. But I think I was just listening earlier to your episodes with other guys on there. I was just thinking about a conversation I had with a buddy of mine. We had served together. He was on the ship with me from 2004 to 2006 and lives out in Hawaii. And I was out there for a war game just last year. And we were sitting out on his patio, just having beers and talking and talking about just also all the bad times in a way, like felt bad at the time, but kind of that like shared pain, that shared misery stuff, and realized like, you just never experience those times. I think that's one of the hardest things for veterans, I think, is that you're never gonna probably have that bond with those group of guys or guys and gals that you have in the military. It's just
Yeah.
you can't, I've been a part of, workplaces that are a little more sterile and kind of, just professional, not really all that close. I've
Yeah.
been a part of workplaces that are really friendly and we all kind of, just get along. Like right now, just a great team working together, but you don't have that bond
Suffering.
of being, yeah, just together all the time, going through the same garbage. There's just that connection. And we even talked about the fact that the dreams we have. I
Yep.
dream about my time in the Navy more than anything else. And I don't know if that's just because,
Weird.
living on the ship 24/7, but it dominates kind of your subconscious.
Yeah.
I think it's just so interesting the way that it comes together. I'll recommend another book and
Yeah.
I'll plug for somebody that I respect a lot. John Spencer wrote a great book called Connected Soldiers, which is really, really good. He kind of basically did a study and really a look at, he had been a commander of troops in airborne units as well. And he had deployed at different points early into Afghanistan, Iraq, but then later in the conflicts as well, and kind of noted the differences in how soldiers connected as things like social media really became popular. Because I look back at it and I can look at the time I spent in the Navy, and there was a lot of it was we had those shared experiences because there kind of was no other escape. Like you had connection. I had more connection than my dad had when he was in the Navy. I had things like that, and then later on, a little bit of social media. But a lot of your soldiers and across the DoD service members now have so much access so frequently that they can really escape from each other for
Right.
better or worse and go back to connect to family and old friends and things like
Right.
that. Whereas we didn't have that. So
Right.
you had to get used to the people around you. And I don't mean that to say, old man yelling at the cloud, social media is bad. I think there's so
It's a
many benefits
difference.
to it's just, so how do you build that camaraderie between your soldiers? And I think that translates again to the civilian world because
Yeah.
you don't have to have that shared experience so consistently. So how
Yeah.
do you build teams without having it that way?
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's
the
not
Vietnam.
for or against. It's,
Well, you had the World War II generation that they deployed for like 3 years, and then
right.
they're saying, "Well, we deployed for 3 years." And the Vietnam guys like, "We deployed for a year," and then like our generation comes around, like, "Well, we can call home." Like we couldn't call home. They barely had
Yeah.
phones, and it's just
Yeah.
it just
Exactly.
rolls over. It's not like it's good, bad, or indifferent.
It's
it's
just
called
different. And
technology. So
how do we build,
true story though.
with each other through that?
So I was a recruiter years ago, right? From
Yeah.
08 to 12 when I was enlisted. And I was literally in this guy's house. And he was a Vietnam vet. And his son was all about joining. And it was just super, or maybe his grandson. I can't remember. It was, he was 17. And he had legal authority to sign. And we're talking. Here I am, a 3-time combat infantryman in his, in his house. And he said, "Well, when I was in basic training, we didn't call home and get our cell phones." And I was like, "Sir, with all due respect, cell phones didn't even exist. Like we call that like improvement technology. It's great. Like, yes,
Exactly. Yeah, I
like
think
I
I think
deployed.
about it, and yeah,
It's
exactly. I mean, when I was on a ship and I was wanting to call home to my wife,
right.
I had to. They had these things on the carrier called a sailor phone,
Yeah,
and you paid if it was working
that's
because
always a caveat.
sometimes it wasn't working, and if you were in what on a Navy ship they call a river city, which is like they cut off all kind of outside
Yeah,
communications. and I think Army units in Iraq and Afghanistan, I think had that too in the blackout.
Blackouts, yeah. So someone
When
passed
you had
away, they
casualties
shut everything down,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So, if it was working, it was, 50 cents a minute, which is not,
Yeah.
inexpensive to an E3, And
Yeah.
so
10
it's
minutes
like,
and broke.
yeah, we're like, all right, we're gonna get off. Let's keep this quick. And now I see, there are sailors a lot of times that have capabilities to FaceTime, Skype,
Right.
back home,
Great.
not just call, but like do it and not have to pay for it. I don't see that as my day, I do this, something like that. That would be awesome if I
Yeah,
was able to
I'm
do
more
that.
jealous than I am back in my day. It's like,
Yeah,
dang, what was
exactly. So
when
I think
so I deployed
it was
05, 06, 07. And like I remember 05 Afghanistan, we had one phone, a satellite phone for the whole platoon. And then we had a platoon plus, and there's like 57 of us, and there's one phone. So like you're like setting your alarm for like 3 a.m. So you're like, come on, it's my turn. I got this. Yes. So get in line, get in line, and it was like this big battle to call. And then like 06, we were on a big fob, and it was like going to these call centers, and we're like, this is weird. Like a year ago, we didn't have this. And then in 07 on the surge, we're in Baghdad, and it's like crazy. It's kind of not a whole lot of improvement, but then I go to, years later, I go to OCS and come back. I'm in Dubai in 2013, and, iPhones came out, and here I am FaceTiming my wife at the time every morning. Like our routine was just to talk every morning.
yeah,
It's crazy.
it's an absolute change, and I don't think I we do ourselves a disservice
Yeah.
if we get on and say
Yeah.
these kids don't even know.
I have to ask you though. So you said you're on the ship from 04 to 06. Were you in the
Oh,
Gulf?
04 to 07.
So were you July 06 or from July 06 through 07, but most of the fall of 06, were you in the middle in the Gulf then?
Not in the fall of 06.
Yeah.
So we got to the Gulf. That was about in January. I'd say we got to the Gulf around February of 2007.
Yeah. Because we were one of the few units, not to get about my escapades, but they actually got a call for naval gunfire, and it was freaking awesome. So
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah,
yeah.
it was a great experience because I was a all source intel analyst, kind of on the watch.
Yeah.
So basically watching out for everything from bad guys in that region.
Yeah.
Came to naval air, coastal fire stuff. But we had a lot of guys on there who were running the strike missions, and we were really doing a lot of close air support for troops in contact, and that was a great thing in terms
awesome.
of obviously don't want to have that happen, but
it's war. That's the nature of the beast.
Yeah, to see that we were out there to be able to support them was really fantastic. So
that's awesome.
That part, sometimes in the Navy, it very much felt like especially in the OIF, OES time period,
yeah,
it felt like curious about the Navy, like all right, the real forces here are busy fighting it out. Besides, like obviously our naval special warfare folks, but it felt like that. So to feel like our ship was contributing to the fight then was really important. I thought it was great when you were talking to Adam about comparison of service and things like that. I spent I don't know if you know Colonel Lisa Jester, but gone through Ranger School. She's works for the Talent War Group, but she had a great book come out called Delete the Adjective. But she was put out a post recently on LinkedIn that talked about comparison of service, and we have this tendency to say I was just, especially folks like me who weren't in combat arms, to say I just did this, I was just that. And she was talking about taking that out of the language, and that's something I've had to work on because for a long time I felt like, man, I never put boots on the ground in Iraq or Afghanistan. I was deployed, but never had a shot fired in anger at me. And for a long time, it felt really hard when people would say, if they saw I was Navy, I don't wear a lot of like Navy stuff or things like that. But when people would notice or say something and say thank you for your service, it was almost kind of embarrassing to me, or I would feel kind of shame about like I wasn't fighting like I didn't really know what to say besides,
Yeah.
thanks for your support, but
Yeah.
really just didn't made me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I think I've tried to tackle that over the last couple of years and just be like, you know what? I played my part as I was supposed to, and everybody has a part to play. And I think
Yeah.
the conversation you and Adam had helped out even more because you don't choose what period you're serving
Exactly.
in, what time period, or I think I can't remember if it was you or Adam said, like, it's not like, hey, all right, so sign up for this team for the war next week.
Right. It's very true. It's actually funny you said that, because the episode I'm releasing this Friday with a guy, he joined the Army right out of high school, right after Desert Storm. And, Desert Storm was like, the fall of 95, wasn't it? And
91, yeah.
91, sorry, 91, I'm way off.
Yeah.
I'm thinking fifth grade for me. Sorry, that's where that thought is coming from. And then, so he joined the Army in May of 92 and got out in August of 01.
And so he was never in there for
so
the big.
he missed Desert Storm and got out a few weeks before 9/11. And he's like, and he's walking around as a vet. People are like, thanks for your service. He's like, he's struggled with that exact thing. So that's what our episode is coming out Friday. So it's a great lead in. So I appreciate that. So, but look, I'll let you go, man. This has been a whole lot of fun. And
absolutely. I really appreciate you having me on. I can talk to you forever.
We definitely could, but I have to do part 2 at some point for sure, and get some get some other people on here to enjoy it. So if you haven't subscribed, definitely subscribe, and we'd love to hear from you more. And Luke, good luck in your endeavors, and we'll definitely have to stay in touch.